I'm sure a few of you have seen a video on your feed recently, this one in particular.
As someone who considers myself the Lorax of Harley Quinn, I feel that it was only a matter of time, whether it happened early on or later on, that I would get around to doing this video, explaining the worst relationship in comics, and why that is Harley and Ivy.
This video by YouTuber JesterBell proclaims Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy's relationship, one that has become one of the more popular ships in superhero comics, is the worst relationship among superheroes ever. And I have some thoughts. Not just about the video, but I do have thoughts about those as well. But rather also about Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy as characters. JesterBell's channel is one I was introduced to fairly recently, so I don't want to direct any hate her way or anything like that, but she appears to be a channel that primarily focuses on accentuating the negative in any situation. She seems to think that Kamala Khan, for example, has a popularity that's been constructed by Marvel, that it's not really a real popular character, but rather a psyop that Disney has produced to push an unsuccessful character our way, which, okay, that's what you believe. I really can't convince you otherwise. She's made several videos lamenting the direction DC has taken Harley Quinn in recent years, and well, there's a lot to unpack about all this. A lot, and not all of it's easy. Now, this video is part a response to JesterBell, but it also has a point to make. A point beyond just JesterBell's video, and more around how we discuss characters like Harley and Ivy, both as characters and as a relationship. I'm using this as a jumping off point is what I'm saying, but I will also be responding to her video because I have a lot of issues with how it's been, how it was made, I'll say. Now, JesterBell had previously made some content about Harley, including one focused on the, I can't believe I have to talk about this, the Fartacular April Fool's book, where Harley tries to make Poison Ivy feel more comfortable about the fragrance of her past wind with the letters of James Joyce, who famously wrote several private letters with his wife about, well, you get the idea. The book is really stupid, and I absolutely hated reading it for the sake of mining it for content for this video, but people took it way too seriously when it debuted.
The reaction to it is certainly overblown in terms of the way it's described as the end of all comics, or the end of Harley Quinn as a character, or a deliberate attempt to destroy comic fandom. Some things are hyperbolic. It can be hard to gauge genuine versus performative passion online. Most likely, it's a joke that some thought was funny that doesn't really translate out into the wider scope of the world. People's perception and their experiences, a lot of that, as with anything, but especially with this, are going to impact how they receive this comic. There is also another factor to consider, which is that this makes good content. It's something that's going to get people curious. It's going to make a good thumbnail. One can create all kinds of titling for it. And the more hyperbolic, the better, at least in terms of content.
Because I really don't care about the book, I won't waste my time talking about it any further. But JesterBell brings it up every time she talks about Harley Quinn.
And obviously there was the Stepan Sejic Harley and Ivy BDSM comic that they let him produce, and recently the Harley and Ivy fart fetish comic, which I covered on this channel, where Harley is obsessed with smelling Ivy's farts. This relationship is so sexualized and so fetishized, and there's actually nothing of substance behind it.
Now, as a critic, I decided to watch some of JesterBell's videos before reacting to the major Harley and Ivy video, to get a sense of her critical style, and I noticed a few red flags right away.
Harley Quinn. She's a character that a lot of people claim to hate these days. She's a character a lot of people claim to be overexposed, overused, annoying, just DC's Deadpool. Is DC trying to make Harley Quinn their Deadpool?
For one, she talks as an authority, making statements that are making these declarative statements that are just, we just have to accept them as they are. For example, she says Harley Quinn is written like Deadpool. No, that's not true. She says that Harley Quinn is becoming DC's Deadpool, which is very different.
How did we get from the character that was a henchman in a jester onesie talking in a Judy Holliday accent to fart fetish comics and whatnot? Is DC just trying to make her their Deadpool? Well, yes, that's actually the reason. No, the factual reason, as many people speculate, that's the factual reason.
She attacks the writers who wrote Harley Quinn like this.
But the fetishization of these characters only get worse. I've talked about this before, but let's just get into it. There was this comic called Harley and Ivy, the Eat, Bang, Kill Tour. And it is exactly what it implies. Now, this lady they hired, T. Franklin, she is just this drugged out lady online. She is just crazy if you've seen anything that she posted. But they take out this really drugged out lady who is a former prostitute, and she writes this comic, and the entire comic is just a softcore porn book. T. Franklin put in all of her fetishes and all the things that she knows in this comic, and even self-inserted herself into the comic at one point. I could not believe that DC Comics would release this book for who used to be two of their icons from the Batman universe, and they even let her do another one.
And at times I found made some misleading statements. Not necessarily wrong, but misleading. And whether that's because of ignorance or because of a genuine need to mislead her audience, I'm not really sure, but it's still worth pointing out all the same. For example, in her video titled, "The Real Reason Harley Quinn Got Destroyed," JesterBell said Harley Quinn's first comic appearance was in the storyline No Man's Land.
When Harley entered comics, they were going through an event called DC's No Man's Land. It was such a big event that there wasn't really much time to give her focus. Her introduction was marred and intertwined with the No Man's Land event.
And that's true, but her actual first appearance was in the one-shot comic Batman Harley Quinn, which gave us this iconic Alex Ross cover that's been referenced everywhere, including the DC Extended Universe. JesterBell isn't wrong because this one-shot is part of No Man's Land. However, what's odd is how she says there wasn't enough time to establish Harley, which ignores that Harley appeared in an entire comic devoted to establishing her and her origins in the mainline comic continuity. It doesn't make sense how she can say there wasn't enough time when there was an entire one-shot comic devoted to this particular narrative. This also ignores how, in the No Man's Land story itself, Harley and Ivy meet after Joker tries to kill Harley, which is where she gives Harley the chemical cocktail necessary for Harley to touch or be near Poison Ivy without succumbing to the poisons in her skin. So even with this limited space, they were able to establish Harley's origins, as well as her relationships to both Joker and Poison Ivy. JesterBell then says DC barely used Harley Quinn after No Man's Land, before giving her a solo series.
But afterwards, surely they would be able to integrate this character as she was created in Batman the Animated Series and find some new great stories for her to tell. Well, actually, no. In fact, as Harley was introduced in comics, she actually barely appeared in Batman comics and barely appeared with the Joker. In fact, their first call of business of what to do with her was to give her a solo series. A solo series that I think started out with great intentions, but meandered, spun around the drain, didn't really seem to have a place to go, and was eventually canceled after about 38 issues, and was considered a failure from DC at the time. But after the cancellation of that series, where it didn't seem like it was really working for Harley to be a solo character, they still did not return her to the streets of Batman. She would take on things like the Sinister Six or the Gotham City Sirens, which was a series that was also throttled and kind of shoved into the background before the New 52 relaunch. So Harley, despite being a character who was popular with the Joker and Batman material, barely appeared in Batman. Why was that? Well, I think it's because that the main Batman writers just didn't take an interest in her.
She argues DC rarely used Harley Quinn, but there's a few problems there. For one, No Man's Land lasted all throughout 1999, and Harley's first solo series started December 2000, a little over a year after first appearing in No Man's Land. She makes it sound strange that Harley, quote-unquote, barely appeared between No Man's Land and the solo series, but there was only an 11-month time period where these comics could exist. And again, most of Batman's books were devoted to recovery after No Man's Land. There wasn't a lot of room to establish a one-on-one fight with Harley in that time period. But then there's the other problem. Harley Quinn did appear quite frequently in the 11-month time span between No Man's Land and her solo series starting. Here are a few of those appearances. Batman issue 573, Batman issue 574, Action Comics 765 and 770, Adventures of Superman 583, Batman Legend of the Dark Knight 126, Catwoman issues 81 through 84, Batman Shadow of the Bat 93, Detective Comics 740 and 741. All 4 issues of Joker Mask, a Joker crossover with the Mask character. And that's all I found quickly. So in the 11 months between the end of No Man's Land and her solo series starting, Harley Quinn appeared at least 17 different times in 17 different comics. By comparison, between his first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 14 and his death in Amazing Spider-Man 123, the Green Goblin appeared 26 times. That was over the course of a decade. Harley Quinn in 1 year appeared at least 17 times. And unlike Harley, most of Goblin's appearances were brief cameos.
The main Batman writers just didn't take an interest in her.
Now, it's also worth noting that Harley Quinn's solo series starts with Joker planning to murder Harley. That's how it begins, with Joker attempting to kill Harley again, only for Poison Ivy to save her. At the end of this first issue, Harley breaks up with the Joker. Now that said, the Last Laugh storyline would start the month after their solo titles started, where Joker tries to forcibly impregnate Harley. Yeah, that is a thing that happened.
Remember, Harley was popular because of fans of the animated series, fans who were growing up with that version of the character. But that's not necessarily how writers at DC Comics saw in their vision for the Joker. In fact, Grant Morrison, who was writing Batman primarily at the time, seemed to not think that Harley would work with his version of the Joker. The only appearance she makes with the Joker in his entire run is a comic that highlights that Grant Morrison thinks that Joker has evolved beyond Harley. He has no need for a sidekick. He is too violent for her and all of that.
See, a reoccurring thing with all comic characters is that depending on who's writing the character this week, their personalities may be dramatically different. One week, Harley might be head over heels for Joker. Next, she might be hating Joker. One week, she might be in love with Poison Ivy. The next, not so much. They're on the rocks. Poison Ivy might be a very supportive partner one week, and then the other week, a cold sociopath. These characters are written by dozens of different writers over the course of decades. Depending on who's writing them, they might be drastically different characters. And to make a general grand statement about the characters, when it depends on how the writer is interpreting these figures, it could be a little problematic. Because, and we'll get to it with more specifics later on, but just keep in mind that a lot of the way these characters are written depends on who is writing them at that point in time, and not a sweeping generalization of how every writer writes all these characters at every time. With one key exception. The Joker is always abusive to Harley. That is the one universal constant throughout every writer who writes Harley Quinn and Joker. Unless you're David Ayers in, the DC Extended Universe, but we'll get to that another time.
It seemed like editors weren't really understanding what made Harley popular in the original series, which is why they punted her off to solo books or things separate from Batman, and otherwise it just didn't seem like writers were really taking an interest in her.
JesterBell makes it sound like Harley was barely being used by DC, but JesterBell leaves out a lot of context. And as a result, she gives her audience a false impression. Also, minor thing, at one point you say Harley Quinn was messing around with the Sinister Six.
But after the cancellation of that series, where it didn't seem like it was really working for Harley to be a solo character, they still did not return her to the streets of Batman. She would take on things like the Sinister Six or the Gotham City Sirens, which was a series that was also throttled and kind of shoved into the background before the New 52 relaunch.
I think you mean the Secret Six, a very different team. Statistics is Spider-Man, it's Doc Ock and Sandman, and it's slip of the tongue, I get it, but it happens. But what's weird is that she calls a comic that ran for 38 issues a failure.
A solo series that I think started out with great intentions, but meandered, spun around the drain, didn't really seem to have a place to go, and was eventually canceled after about 38 issues, and was considered a failure from DC at the time.
That being the Harley Quinn solo title. And then she dismisses the entire existence of Gotham City Sirens.
But after the cancellation of that series, where it didn't seem like it was really working for Harley to be a solo character, they still did not return her to the streets of Batman. She would take on things like the Sinister Six or the Gotham City Sirens, which was a series that was also throttled and kind of shoved into the background before the New 52 relaunch.
She pretends that nearly 100 appearances across a decade is irrelevant. And most of them involved either Batman or Gotham-associated characters. Barely appearing, of course, naturally. There's not any context given as to why she's not appearing, but hey, what are you going to do? She also glosses over Countdown to Final Crisis, a storyline that Harley Quinn played a major role in. But then again, considering how Countdown is not fondly remembered, this decision may be for the best.
Jeez, look at all of this! 51 issues? Clearly I can't recap every one of them. We'd be here for a year. But I can sum it up in 3 words. These comics suck!
Countdown is not even in Final Crisis, Countdown was kind of ignored. So, I get that. Even though she's a major character in this event, what are you gonna do? Anyway, JesterBell seems to believe Harley Quinn is best presented as Joker's girlfriend, as someone who is subservient to his will, which I deeply disagree with, on many levels, actually. Harley Quinn's appeal is that she's someone who is forever hurt by the Joker, not merely an extension of his character.
However, it was her creator Paul Dini to the rescue again. Paul Dini would write Batman the Arkham series, and in that series he brought Harley back to form. She was back to being the hench girl of the Joker, a villain for Batman, and because of this, Harley exploded in popularity during that time, and because of her new redesign, started to sell boatloads of merchandise. So Harley was becoming this big character again. But would DC Comics take note and understand what made her work? No.
In the examples JesterBell cites as peak Harley Quinn, like the Arkhamverse stories, Harley exists as basically an extension of the Joker's character. And though even in Arkhamverse, Harley develops beyond the Joker as time goes on. In part because they kill off the Joker. You really can have her be like an extension of the Joker when the Joker is no longer alive. That's kind of a bit of a problem with that kind of characterization. They're forced to write her differently. One point JesterBell cites is that Harley's books weren't really selling all that well prior to her appearance in the Arkhamverse.
It seemed like editors weren't really understanding what made Harley popular in the original series, which is why they punted her off to solo books or things separate from Batman, and otherwise it just didn't seem like writers were really taking an interest in her. And as this was happening, Harley actually dipped in popularity big time after the Batman the Animated Series wasn't airing anymore, and she wasn't given really much good representation in comics.
And yeah, Harley's solo books didn't sell gangbusters according to Comic-Con, but Gotham City Sirens would regularly sell in the top 50 comics of each month it ran. The debut issue ranked 32nd, selling better than Superman, Daredevil, Cable, even Deadpool. It regularly outsold Wonder Woman, Titans, Thunderbolts, and even some X-Men and Spider-Man comics. And this is not accounting for how well individual issues with Harley did in terms of sales, because Batman 663, which featured Harley, ranked at 16th place in February 2007. Detective Comics 831 ranked 41st in April 2007. I could go on, but you get the idea. I've already cited actual sales figures, which is far more than JesterBell did when making declarative statements about Harley Quinn selling at all. Now let's establish something right now. Did the Arkhamverse games boost Harley's popularity? Absolutely. That is undeniable. I'd be crazy to say otherwise. But they only put her in the Arkham games so prominently because Harley Quinn was already a massively popular character. She only exists in the comics because she was a massively popular character from the animated series. Renee Montoya was added to the comics after being introduced in the animated series as well. But Renee Montoya, despite being a really well-written character, is not as noteworthy as Harley Quinn. Therefore, didn't get the same treatment. It's just logic. The character gets pushed harder the more popular they are. That being said, Harley Quinn and Renee Montoya do date in Batman the Caped Crusader, but we'll get to that another time.
Next time, maybe I'll take you to the skating rink and I'll let you call them whatever you want.
Next time, huh? Guess I'm doing okay then.
But all that so far has been a background as to why I think JesterBell's style doesn't mesh well with me. Because we haven't even gotten yet to the actual video that JesterBell made about Harley and Ivy. And if you think we have a lot to chew on now, just wait. Look at the runtime. We have some time to talk about this for a little bit. Now, obviously, Harley and Ivy have been in a relationship of some kind for a very long time, since their initial appearance in the Batman animated series. Harley was created, first and foremost, as a glorified henchwoman for the Joker. She was meant to just show up in one episode, wheel in a cake, look kind of neat, have an interesting costume, etc. But the character was so popular that they kept bringing her back for more and more episodes. And with each appearance, the writers found new ways to engage the concepts of the character. The show eventually established a few core tenets for Harley that are very important. For one, Harley is in an abusive relationship with Joker. For two, Harley acts silly, but is actually incredibly competent and clever when she can, being in some cases more a threat to Batman than the Joker is because she doesn't get in her own way with the jokes. And three, Poison Ivy is Harley's companion, who helps Harley out of the Joker's abusive grips.
Why do you put up with that clown?
Don't get me wrong, my pudding's a little rough sometimes, but he loves me, really.
Treating her as an equal rather than a subordinate. She is sometimes very aggressive and cold to Harley, but at the same time, it comes from a place of at least seeing her as an equal rather than as an object to control. Now, everything else would change over time, but those three components are very important. Of course, as is the case with all things, over time, Harley's relationship with Ivy would be reframed as a romantic one. At first, it's more of a companionship, a friendship, maybe something more with teases beyond that, but the comics eventually confirmed they are indeed in some form of romantic relationship. It was teased, though, much longer than it was canonically confirmed, however. They did not get into a relationship until after the New 52, where Harley entered into an open relationship with Ivy. They date, she dated other men, of course, but she'd always come back to Ivy eventually, until later comics retconned the relationship went far further in the past than we initially realized. So the claim that JesterBell makes, that the whole relationship is a little more than fetish bait, is something I find very uncomfortable. I don't like that idea, and I have issues with how JesterBell argues it. And to show you the full depth of how I have issues with it, we're going to go through JesterBell's video, break it down point by point by point to illustrate with examples backed by comic history why I think JesterBell is either misrepresenting the relationship or just plain wrong, and further, why it's important to push against these points. JesterBell does not dodge or hide why she doesn't like Harley and Ivy. She argues that the relationship is exhausting or sickening.
But then you have Harley and Ivy, a relationship that is very vomit-inducing, that has been fetishized to death up and down throughout all of comics, yet it is relentlessly shoved down our throats. Not a simple shock value, but telling me over and over again, ad nauseum, that this is the greatest, most healthiest relationship of all time. That it is the most iconic relationship, one of the most iconic relationships in comics. I have seen articles out there that just seem outright worshipful towards this couple, and it's really sickening when you consider what the actual relationship these two have in comics has and how it's been pushed.
This I find to be a bit of a red flag. She even goes as far as saying that Harley and Ivy's relationship is worse than Mary Jane and Paul's.
But let's get on with it, shall we? Because when I say worst relationship in comics, that is instantly going to get a lot of blowback in the comments section, because comic books have graced us with such relationships as Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch's incestuous relationship in Ultimate Comics, or the Mary Jane and Paul stuff that is still vomit-inducingly going on in current comics.
Well, I have some thoughts on Paul.
Hey, Paul!
I think I made my opinions on Paul pretty clear in the past. I think. Now, one reason JesterBell falls back onto as to why Harley and Ivy shouldn't be together is that Harley and Ivy weren't created initially to be in a romance, which, yeah, that's technically true.
But the thing that even people who dislike this relationship will say is that, yeah, I hate the relationship too, but it was always a part of their characters. Ever since they first appeared in Batman the Animated Series, they've always meant to be a romantic couple. That is a lie. It is a lie that has been perpetuated so much, and one that is actually very easy to debunk. And it really shocks me, I guess, just how much this lie has been perpetuated, and seeing just how many people, even ones who don't even like the relationship, buy into it. But no, actually, Harley and Ivy were not always meant to be a couple. Their relationship was originally platonic, and I am going to crush the hearts of shippers right now and actually prove it to them.
Harley and Ivy were not made originally to be in a romantic relationship. The pair started essentially as many do. The writers thought, what would happen if we pair these two characters together and see what chemistry they build together? And that chemistry they built was pretty good. In the Harley and Ivy episode, we see a real sense of these characters together. This is not the first time DC had done this with characters in the animated series. I mean, in her first episode, Poison Ivy is paired up with Harvey Dent, and that dynamic is very interesting as well. But the chemistry between Harvey Dent and Poison Ivy is nowhere near as electric or compelling or interesting as that between Harley and Ivy, in part because Harley and Ivy help inspire change in the other. At this point in time, Ivy was very sociopathic, very anti-human, but Harley is someone Ivy can care for. Yes, she is aggressive, yes, she bullies her at times, but there is still a sense of respect, of true affection for Harley that goes deeper than the surface. And as for Harley, it's someone who can treat her right, someone she can trust as a companion, as a friend, someone who she can gush over and be excited about, but who won't betray that trust like the Joker will. It's a person that she can care about who cares for her as well. One cited moment here is this one, where Harley and Ivy are seen wearing long shirts with no visible pants beneath.
In the first episode that Harley and Ivy appear in, there's a scene where they're hanging out at Ivy's house and they're only wearing long shirts. And they have said that this is part of the proof that Harley and Ivy were always a couple from the beginning. Beyond that, there's also an episode later on, or well, a third of the episode, where Harley and Ivy are at a hotel room and there's only one bed in the background of that hotel room. And they say that this is proof that in the background, in the very, very obvious subtext of the show, that Harley and Ivy were a romantic and sexual couple. Allow me to debunk this, please. These 2 points do not at all prove that Harley and Ivy were a couple. It actually is not abnormal at all for 2 girls who are best friends or maybe sisters to hang out like this.
This could be interpreted as proof Harley and Ivy were intimate, but it can also just be read as 2 people feeling comfortable and willing to be vulnerable with one another, especially people who are known for violence and action rather than inaction. Or it could be interpreted as the animators just drawing something they thought was appealing. This happens a lot in animation, but I really don't think it matters why they made it. It's something that sparks speculation, which inspired later writers to build on said speculation. Whether or not they were intended as roommates or lovers or friends is beside the point. What mattered is that people reacted to something. I don't think it honestly matters if a character is created to be the one true love for another character. Kitty Pryde, for example, has never had a love interest created for her. Yet no one complains how she gets into romances with Colossus, Peter Parker, or Magic. Yet those relationships exist in much the same way Harley and Ivy exists. Stick 2 characters together who are pre-established and see if the chemistry builds. It's that simple. There's not much to it. But the argument that the video comes up with is that there is nothing erotic in the animated series.
So, guys, here's the deal, and I'm not saying this to try to attack anyone or start a fight or anything, but here is the problem with looking at Harley and Ivy's relationship like this. Most girls in real life do not have a same-sex attraction to other women. Statistically, it's actually a very small percentage of people who have a same-sex attraction. So how this applies to when we talk about fictional relationships and something like Harley and Ivy is, in real life, it's perfectly normal for girls to share beds or just hang out and not have to be completely modest.
Because most girls don't have same-sex attraction to other women, which the phrasing for one is very Mormon.
Jeff and his wife Tanya are devout Mormons from Salt Lake City, Utah.
The only acceptable expression of sexuality and romantic feelings is within a marriage between a man and a woman.
So Jeff has chosen to have a church-sanctioned marriage and control his feelings of same-sex attraction.
But who really cares? Who cares if most girls don't? These characters do, and have expressed in various media that they are attracted to women. I mean, again, Batman the Great Crusader puts Harley Quinn with Renee Montoya. These aren't characters who exist exclusively for one relationship or the other. They are characters who, even in other situations, may still be interested in other women. And so the idea that just because most women aren't this way, What does that matter? What kind of counter argument is that? The characters are. So what? It's a very odd argument to start down, and it does not bode well for the rest of JesterBell's arguments if that's what she's leaning on as evidence as to why Harley and Ivy shouldn't be together. Just because most people are straight doesn't mean these particular characters are.
Or there's a reason why for gyms or prisons or schools where girls will share the same showers and have to see each other undressed. The entire thought behind it is that most girls don't feel an attraction to each other, so there shouldn't be any sort of fear of being around each other in that way.
I feel this comment right here about women fearing being exposed to other women in private places tells me a lot about how she's viewing this. That Harley and Ivy's relationship isn't being seen through the lens of two broken people coming together to heal each other, but more something that's inherently predatory due to their attraction. I think this really illustrates my concern, especially when she frames Poison Ivy as just as manipulative or abusive as the Joker.
This entire idea that people have concocted in their minds that Harley and Ivy just had this super loving, supportive relationship, and that even if they weren't in a relationship romantically, then they should be, is just a lie. If you actually watch and read most of the material with Harley and Ivy, it typically portrayed their dynamic is Harley is the dumb woman child who is hung up on an evil, abusive clown, and Ivy is her cold-hearted, cruel, tough-love older sister figure who oftentimes is cold and even abusive to Harley herself.
The point is that Harley and Ivy can be vulnerable with one another. Framing this as a constructed scenario, as fans forcing an agenda, it just kind of misses the point. It misses the organic chemistry that made Harley and Ivy so appealing to fans, because they just put them together and saw what happened. That's what drew fans to them. Further, the discussion about censorship here is pretty ridiculous.
Even if these scenes explicitly implied something sexual between these characters, like, there's no way that censorship at the time wouldn't have picked up on it. Like, think about it. Even in these days, people are having a hard time getting LGBT couples out there in cartoons and whatnot. In the 90s, while in adult entertainment, it was starting to become easier to portray gay relationships and gay characters in stuff aimed at adults, they still would not allow that in stuff made for kids. And I haven't found anything anywhere that says that there was some sort of controversy behind the scenes with them pushing that, because there would have been some sort of concern at this time. We're talking about the early 90s here, if there was explicitly a lesbian relationship in this show, and if these scenes undeniably implied something sexual. So you cannot use these scenes out of context and declare that that means that Harley and Ivy were in a relationship in this show undeniably.
I think people have forgotten how often children's shows got stuff past the radar, especially children's media in the 90s.
I found prints! No, fingerprints. I don't think so.
This entire perspective is pretty ridiculous when you consider how much the Animaniacs got away with explicitly adult humor in its children's show. Sometimes very explicitly. And that was on the same network, same studios, same everything.
One of the more prominent things that people use to prove that Harley and Ivy were always in a relationship is they say, well, Bruce Timm and Paul Dini have always said that they were meant to be in a relationship. I don't think when people understand the difference between Bruce Timm and Paul Dini and what role they had in the creation of the characters. So let me say it to you. Bruce Timm is just the artist who made Harley's Jester suit design. That is it. Paul Dini is the one who wrote Harley and came up with the idea, he said, for Harley and Ivy to be best friends in a partnership, because he merely wanted to do two girls on a crime spree, and he thought that Harley and Ivy were the most contrasting pairing and that would work, and Bruce Timm signed off on it. But getting into what they've actually said, no, it is not cut and dry as saying that these two creators have said that Harley and Ivy were always intended to be a romantic couple.
I don't think it matters what Bruce Timm and Paul Dini did or didn't say about Harley Quinn's sexuality or her relationships, because the character of Harley Quinn exists beyond its original creators.
In fact, Bruce Timm, who people are all the time citing as supposedly having said this, I have looked far and wide. Comic-Con interviews, magazine interviews, internet interviews, old interviews on DVDs for the show. Bruce Timm has never referred to Harley and Ivy as anything other than best friends or sisters.
The only human being that she ever shows really any sign of affection for at all is Harley. And that's more just kind of like in a big sister kind of way.
He simply has never said that they were a romantic couple. He, in fact, has said very explicitly that they were meant to be sisters in the show. And I have to say, it's funny that when I saw Bruce Timm in an interview on YouTube say that about Harley and Ivy, I saw comments denying it, saying that he is not telling the truth. So if you want to go to the creators and use their word as proof that these characters were always a couple, then and all of a sudden it's not proof if he's telling you what you don't want to hear.
Paul Dini and Bruce Timm do not own Harley Quinn. Just because they created a character does not mean that character is forever within the confines of their ownership. Also, this ignores the comic that is canon to the animated series where Batgirl jokes about Harley and Ivy having a relationship. Oh wait, no, JesterBell doesn't forget that, because now JesterBell argues that the reason Harley and Ivy might be created like this is because that the creators are perverts, that Bruce Timm is a pervert.
Bruce Timm is a perv, and I might even go far enough to say he's a misogynist. If you've seen his work apart from Batman the Animated Series, you know what I'm talking about. Bruce Timm, he gets a great reputation because of the work that he did on Batman the Animated Series, and he definitely needs to be commended for that. But it's been a consistent thing with Bruce Timm, apart from his work from kids' projects where he had other people reining him in. He is very, very pervy. He has pervy thoughts about these DC characters, and he's come up with terrible work.
Great. Look, does Bruce Timm create a ton of hypersexual stuff? Yeah. He has a long history of art filled with cheesecake.
Stuff that I hope you will recognize from his work with Batgirl in the Batman Beyond comic, where he made Batman get her pregnant when she was engaged to his adopted son, or the Killing Joke movie, or of course Batman and Harley Quinn. And that brings us back to our point here. You have to understand that Bruce Timm has created maybe thousands of pervy drawings regarding DC characters, particularly DC ladies.
His push to continually pair Barbara Gordon and Bruce Wayne together is deeply infuriating. I think it's kind of awful taking this dynamic with a large age gap and maturity gap and changing it like this. Barbara is the daughter of one of his closest companions, Jim Gordon. She's either Bruce's protege or surrogate daughter. The whole relationship feels really gross and wrong, depending on how you look at it, and Bruce Timm is responsible for this pairing continually showing up in Batman media. However, by conflating that with the relationship with Harley and Ivy, it's deeply flawed to argue that because a creative team came up with one bad relationship, that all their ideas are bad. It just is very oversimplified. Bruce Timm did force Barbara Gordon and Bruce Wayne together, but that does not mean that him pairing Harley and Ivy together is a bad thing by association. I think it's also deeply messed up to argue that an artist who draws NSFW art is somehow can't create a compelling romance on screen. That's kind of weird, right? And to conflate erotic art with mainstream storytelling, it's deeply misleading, because what does that have anything to do with each other? You know, Stephen King can write horror and he can write drama. Just because he can write one doesn't mean he can't write the other. Again, the video goes on and on and on about intentionality, including references to that comic I said it before. Turns out the vid does reference that, but dismisses it as a joke.
Now, there's the one thing about Paul Dini, is he did write a comic in 1997 called Batgirl Adventures, where Batgirl and Harley Quinn team up to rescue Poison Ivy. And at one point we have this exchange where Harley mentions dreamily that Poison Ivy gave her a serum so that they could quote-unquote play and she won't get sick. Batgirl assumes that Harley must mean something sexual by that and starts to inquire, does she mean that they were a couple? Harley acts weirded out and asks Batgirl, you mean like the same thing they say about you and Supergirl? And Batgirl moves on. It is clearly a joke in the comic, and it does not clarify that they are in a relationship, but of course they do leave it open-ended. So people are using this as proof that Harley and Ivy were always meant to be a couple at this point. Now, Paul Dini, through all his talk, has never brought up this comic again, but people would still say that, there's too much here.
I don't know about you, but I don't really see grossed out. I see more piecing things together, kind of turning a question around on Batgirl, but I digress. Are you sensing a pattern with these comments, by the way? Because I sure am.
Now, it is true, apart from Paul Dini, there were a couple writers out there that did focus on some of the more positive elements of Harley and Ivy's relationship, but even there, they made it clear. Ivy ultimately proves that she will not put Harley over her work with plants, because Ivy was her own character, and that was her goal in life. And by the way, that scene of Harley asking Ivy if she loves her in the end of Gotham City Sirens was actually her doing that just to taunt her so she could attack her and run away with the Joker. These two characters, Ivy was not portrayed as a person who would put Harley over her plants, and Harley was not portrayed as someone who would put Ivy over the Joker. These were their two respective obsessions. Harley and Ivy, as Bruce Timm said, was more like a dysfunctional, psychopathic version of a sisterly relationship, where you got the older, more sensibly minded sister, and then the younger, crazier sister who gets on the older sister's nerves. The idea that this was just a super affectionate and supportive relationship between the two that could not be read as anything other than romantic is just absurd. It also doesn't make sense because Harley was so clearly infatuated with the Joker, and at this point in the character's evolution, there could be no one else for her.
So JesterBell then points out an issue of Gotham City Sirens, where Harley teases Ivy for potentially having affection for her, saying that the reason Ivy does anything for Harley is because of her desire for Harley. And this scene happens before Harley relapses again for the 100th time and runs back to the Joker again, after trying to break into Arkham to kill him. And it's framed as Harley still remaining dependent on her abusive relationship with the Joker. Further, it also plays as Harley trying to emotionally manipulate Ivy, to argue that she's not as altruistic as she believes herself to be. That's a core element of Poison Ivy's character. Are her actions altruistic or self-serving? It's a big deal, big question. But Gotham City Sirens, the thing that JesterBell ignores with this whole story, this whole comic, is that Gotham City Sirens is a story about broken people being broken. The Gotham City Sirens, a team-up of Harley, Ivy, and Catwoman, only forms in the wake of Batman going missing. And when Batman does return, Catwoman strikes a deal with Batman so she can help reform both Ivy and Harley, because Catwoman sees there's a lot of good in both of them that can be brought out. This is one of the reasons why Batman doesn't fight Harley and Ivy for such a long period of time, because as is established in that DC animated universe you keep citing as a major factor in determining the trajectory of Harley's character, Batman believes Harley can be reformed. It's a core part of their relationship that Batman sympathizes deeply with Harley.
Just stay with me all day, risking your butt for someone who's never given you anything but trouble.
I know what it's like to try and rebuild a life. I had a bad day too, once.
And so Catwoman offering to help bring Harley to redemption is a good thing. Why would Batman fight Harley if he is under the impression that she is on the path to justice? It wouldn't make sense. It would just be going backwards in her character development as opposed to progressing forward, remaining static to the status quo, rather than establishing that characters can grow. If Batman just fought every single villain who was on the path to redemption, it would be counter to Batman's entire mission statement, that people can become better. JesterBell kind of ignores this. The Joker in Gotham City Sirens is Harley's inner demon that she fails to fight. That's how it is. And I feel it's very strange how JesterBell keeps arguing that Harley can only be written in the way that she was originally written in her first appearance. A character who never grows, they become stagnant, they become boring, they become redundant. And a lot of storytelling opportunities never present themselves, especially if the dynamic is, will Harley leave Joker or will she stay with the Joker and be miserable? That dynamic needs to evolve. It needs to be explored, and other pieces of media explore that. To varying levels of success, yes, I grant you that, but it's still explored all the same. To argue that you can never explore it, never evolve, never develop it, that's not really interesting storytelling. It's stagnant storytelling. It's shackled storytelling. That is what JesterBell is arguing in favor for. Not to get on a soapbox, but its characters evolve and it makes them so interesting. Hell, look at Venom from Marvel as a simple example. Venom was introduced as a villain for Spider-Man, driven only by his obsessive hatred of the Wallcrawler. But writers early on introduced that Venom has this twisted sense of morality, one where he sees himself as a hero and Spider-Man as the villain. Later storylines took this further, with Venom teaming up with Spider-Man to fight enemies like Carnage. Eventually, writers situated Carnage as Venom's archenemy over Spider-Man, with Spider-Man just being a foe of Venom. There's a stretch during the 90s where Venom was off in his various miniseries and barely interacted with Spider-Man, due to a truce the two made, as well as the Clone Saga, which is a whole thing. By the time these minis ran their course and Venom became a Spider-Man villain yet again, the character was fundamentally different than he had been when they previously fought. He didn't really piece in with Spider-Man's story the same way. And this led to various other writers, including Donny Cates, taking hold of the Venom character and taking them in new and interesting directions. Donny Cates' Venom series led to Venom becoming a legitimate hero, even in the eyes of the Avengers, who saves the world from Null, the god of symbiotes. You don't get Venom fighting Null without first deviating from the character first established in Amazing Spider-Man 300. To say Harley must remain static based on the DC Animated Universe version of her, is like saying Venom should never have developed an ethos, never fought Carnage, and never evolved beyond being just a dark foil to Spider-Man. One more thing JesterBell does that I think is very interesting is that she has this odd tendency to overemphasize any interactions between Harley and Ivy as teasing or cruelty.
Most of the interactions between these two are not Ivy being super supportive and just loving and understanding to Harley. It is her getting upset with Harley's antics, scoffing at what she does, making passive-aggressive, condescending statements.
Well, here's your stupid tree. You happy?
And a lot of those comics, in particular where Ivy is portrayed that way, were written by Paul Dini, the guy that they're constantly trying to cite and say that always intended these two to be a couple. Sometimes Paul Dini would portray Ivy as straight up abusive to Harley. And I know that a lot of these scenes were intended to be slapstick comedy, but so were some of the scenes with Harley and the Joker. Paul Dini wrote Ivy as a complete character separate from Harley, and he preferred writing her as a cold-hearted, abusive, really evil seductress. And so when he wrote her with Harley, these tended to be more light-hearted stories, and they would typically portray Ivy as a cold-hearted person who would get annoyed by Harley's antics, and that Harley wanted some approval and attention from her, but was still too obsessed with the Joker. Now, it is true, apart from Paul Dini, there were a couple writers out there that did focus on some of the more positive elements of Harley and Ivy's relationship, but even there, they made it clear. Ivy ultimately proves that she will not put Harley over her work with plants, because Ivy was her own character, and that was her goal in life.
This kind of goes back to the predatory comments she made before about women feeling safe around other women. These are two people who are hurting each other. That's interesting of a dynamic, isn't it? Now, obviously, Harley have their ups and downs, but part of what makes the relationship so interesting is that despite their differences, they still come together for one another. These are two functionally broken people, hurt by the world, who find solace in one another. And while they're both broken people who hurt each other, they do it because they're still fighting the inner darkness within themselves, their own malice, their own pain. It makes for a very interesting story because they both want to recover on some level, but they're also dragged down by their own demons repeatedly. And this is unlike what Joker does to Harley, because Joker does not feel pain about his past. He is not a broken bird the way he presents himself to Harley, which is one of the reasons why Harley was initially drawn to Joker. The idea that the Joker was some damaged poor soul who she could help. Joker exploited that to control her. The Joker is a liar. The Joker does not feel any self-hatred. He does not feel pain. He is a mockery of society, of existence. And as a result, he knows how to play Harley like a harpsichord. Poison Ivy does not. That's a key difference. To say Poison Ivy is just as harmful to Harley as the Joker is deeply misleading, because Joker always comes from a place of artificiality and manipulation. Poison Ivy comes from a place of a hurt person who wants to be better and hurts those around her, whether intentionally or unintentionally. But anyway, with New 52, Harley Quinn became one of the poster children of DC. Some circles still argue right now that Harley Quinn is more of the trinity of DC than Wonder Woman is, because her face is on everything. And oh god, I just realized we haven't even gotten to the New 52. This is all pre-New 52 we talked about so far. Oh dear lord, we're in for a long one here. Harley Quinn in recent memories has drawn more heavily from her post-New 52 iteration, from the outfits she wears to her more independent personality being more associated with Task Force X than Joker. But again, there's a lot to this we gotta unpack. Of note, the Harley Quinn animated series that everyone loves. Everyone loves that series. I mean, except for JesterBell. We'll get to that though. It draws heavily from the post-New 52 version of Harley Quinn, right down to her costume, to her affiliations, to striking away from the Joker more valiantly. While she was still against Joker with Gotham City's Sirens, she felt more independent post-New 52.
But the first time we really got anything that was explicitly implying anything sexual between the characters was when they transformed Harley Quinn into Deadpool, which I have talked about in another video. But when they did this, Poison Ivy started appearing in her series as merely a guest, and whenever she would, there would be all of this sudden innuendo between them. Now, people have taken these panels out of context since and said that this was when Harley and Ivy became an official romantic couple. Actually, it was not. In fact, Harley actually had more prominent, steady relationships with other characters during the series, not with Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy was just portrayed as Harley's friend who would come over and do guest appearance on occasion and get involved with her antics. And it was strange now because there was all of this innuendo between the two, but they were still referred to as friends, even though the innuendo would soon give way to stuff that was just blatantly sexual. It was really confusing.
However, it wasn't until the 2015 Harley Quinn solo series that Harley and Ivy canonically became a couple in the mainstream DC comics. Though I should note, when talking about all this, JesterBell ignores the DC Bombshells alternate continuity, where Harley and Ivy were canon before that. Funny she ignores that. The Bombshells was an alternate history version of the DC universe that took place. You know what? Read Bombshells. It's a great storyline. Great art, too. Injustice, the comics for Injustice, also had Harley and Ivy as a canonical relationship. They were together in that timeline, too. And it indicates that, much like with Mary Jane and Peter Parker in Marvel, the DC editorial team kind of prevented writers from making Harley and Ivy canon in the mainstream comics. They wanted to draw out the will they, won't they dynamic. Meanwhile, alternate continuities, fair game. You can do whatever you want there. But mainstream, they have to tease the relationship further. Emphasize that it may happen. It could happen anytime now. You know, just read next issue, buy next issue, come on down. They want to exploit the imagery of Harley and Ivy without committing to the storytelling potential of them actually being in a relationship. Especially when they can tease Harley being with some other character like Deadshot. Again. But it was the Harley Quinn solo title with Jim Palmiotti and Amanda Conner that changed the game. Harley and Ivy kiss in that run's 25th issue. The first time in canon they kissed. This is also the culmination of tons of innuendo and tons of jokes leading up for years at this point, but Palmiotti and Conner, to their credit, were the ones who put it in canon. Now, their run at times felt very goofy, and I think that's what kind of contributes to the Deadpool-esque energy of Harley in recent years. But I think they did a good job balancing the fun-loving perspective of Harley unshackled by Joker's trauma. Not totally unshackled. There was still some elements of it that came in, but they wanted to emphasize what Harley would be like on Harley's terms. And it felt lighter. It felt more fun. It was a book you wanted to keep reading because it was entertaining. It wasn't always heavy like some other previous comics of Harley were. But the restraints that were let go in that run allowed Harley and Ivy to explore their relationship with one another in a way that's very compelling, at least in my opinion anyway. While researching for this video, though, I found a few odd things. For one, on the DC website, in a 2025 editorial post by Alex Jaffe, DC completely refuses to reference the Palmiotti and Conner run on Harley Quinn as the first instance of them being together, despite it leading into Heroes in Crisis. Rather, they cite the Harley Quinn animated series as the origin point in 2020, and I have a lot of issues with this. It erases the history of what came before in their own comics, with them citing Batman Urban Legends #1 from 2021 as the first issue of Harley and Ivy being together, as well as indicating that the Mariko Tamaki story in the 2021 DC Pride issue might be quote-unquote considered non-canon. It's as if DC editorial have broken up and reunited Harley and Ivy so often, they've forgotten when they actually started being a thing. At least, that's what I would say if there wasn't a second editorial on DC's website casting doubts on the Connor Palmiotti run on Harley Quinn, with statements like, we don't really know if this canonically means they're together. Like, give me a break. You all were tweeting about it when it happened on your official Twitter account. You wanted this to be a thing. You were capitalizing on it being a thing. You were using the relationship as a means to sell your comic, only to cast doubts when you figured, actually, we can use the relationship to sell our animated series instead, or these other comics that are lesser known. That said, Batman Urban Legends #1 included one key retcon. That from near the very start of their relationship in the comics, from shortly after they met in No Man's Land, when Harley was still going back and forth with the Joker, Harley and Ivy were in an on-again, off-again romantic relationship off-panel. The current DC canon is that Harley and Ivy have been together on some level since shortly after their first interaction. This retcon completely changes everything that has happened between these characters, especially recontextualizing their interaction in Gotham City Sirens, where Harley teases Poison Ivy with the prospect of Poison Ivy's interest in Harley not being as altruistic as she indicates. But that's my perspective. Let's look at JesterBell's argument.
So it was kind of a confusing time when they were obviously showing things that were sexual between the two, but they weren't actually allowing them to be a couple. And I honestly believe that DC Comics did not want to commit to these two being a couple in any way, shape, or form. First of all, I don't think DC Comics at all cares about them being a couple, but Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti really wanted to do something there. Was it because of the fan shipping? Probably, but there you have it. But the thing is, I think that the only reason why DC Comics let them get away with this much at the time is I think that they were really fetishizing their relationship.
And look, listen, she's not entirely wrong, but at the same time, she kind of is wrong. DC editorial kept jerking fans around with teasing and suggesting on all the art collateral and all that. They kept teasing all this. And it took until the Harley Quinn solo title and Bombshells and Injustice say, hey, enough is enough. Just put them together in the comics. You keep teasing the relationship, keep marketing them as being in a relationship. All the covers have them together in suggestive poses. Just put them in a relationship already. You might as well. It's a little ridiculous after a certain point, teasing and teasing and teasing and teasing, trying to exploit the imagery of it without ever committing to the idea. It reminds me of another relationship in Marvel, involving Mary Jane and Peter Parker, and I'm not upset by that fucking Paul. However, JesterBell calls the relationship as written, not the artwork of it in the covers for years and years, but the relationship itself as fetishistic.
Harley, this is the point in the time of her career where she became such a fetishized character, and so did her relationship with Poison Ivy. I think that that is the only reason why this came through and all the people that attracts. But it is actually false to say that they were an official couple at this time. They were actually explicitly not. And after Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti left the series, they actually abandoned this whole innuendo, not really innuendo, between the two. Not that you would know it with the fan base that came up after that. Because up to this point, Harley and Ivy, and I lived through the fan base during this time, they were still generally referred to as friends. And that was that, apart from what was going on in the Deadpool series.
As something that is designed to appeal to a demographic who wants it just for the sake of fetishistic appeal, I guess. And I think it's kind of awful for her to say that. Because if anything, the writing decisions were there to move away from the fetishistic treatment both characters received and continue to receive thanks to DC editorial. Fetishistic in this case just means they were putting it there, and to sell books over it. They were more interested in the appearance of Harley and Ivy rather than the relationship between Harley and Ivy.
But then it was around 2016 that this happened, that after Suicide Squad came out and there was all this fandom around Harley in that movie, there was all this damage control done because people were threatened by her relationship with the Joker and worrying that people were going to romanticize that. So there was all this damage control declaring that Harley is actually a strong, independent woman type of character, even though she had only only recently gotten away from the Joker a few months beforehand, and was the furthest thing from a role model that you would want to see with how they would fetishize this character in comics. But with that, all of these articles I saw coming out at the time spread the lie that Harley had actually left the Joker for Poison Ivy and was in a relationship with her. And, well, I mean, if you see some of these panels out of context, you might think that, but that was not the case.
The idea that Harley and Ivy were only put into a relationship by DC as a result of some damage control because of her relationship with Joker and because of the fan response is frankly ridiculous. By the time the New 52 happened in 2011, Harley had been repeatedly leaving the Joker for years. Hell, as I said at the beginning of this video, Harley had been leaving the Joker since 2000, 11 months roughly after her first storyline. It was controversial when in the book Death of the Family, Harley was dragged back into the action with Joker. In fact, in her own tie-in issues, they demonstrated how deeply uncomfortable Harley was with the Joker, how deeply abusive and manipulative the Joker was.
But through all this time, they had a fan base, a new fan base that apparently didn't read comics and was just reading these articles that thought that Harley and Ivy are like this big LGBT couple in comics and that they are really important. And Harley left the Joker for Ivy when it couldn't be further from the truth. DC Comics had never committed to these two being a couple. And the truth is, the most you were getting at the time was mostly very fetishized content written during those Deadpool Harley comics. Kind of like how a lot you would get back in the day was really just Bruce Timm's fetishized drawing.
I think that this video deeply misinterprets what fans liked about Harley and Ivy, because she's arguing any case of them being in media is fetishistic, and not that people just liked a good relationship between two characters who found comfort and solace in one another's arms. Okay, this part right here is so egregiously wrong, I'm just going to show you what JesterBell says, and then use a clip from a much better Harley and Ivy video, just to illustrate how inaccurate what she's saying is.
Ivy was still being portrayed as Harley's friend who just would occasionally make guest appearances and maybe do something sexual between the two. Harley was actually portrayed as in a relationship with a completely different man apart from Poison Ivy, and that was who she was with when she got away with the Joker. It was not she left the Joker for Poison Ivy. And like I said, after this creative team left the book, they kind of started to abandon the idea of Harley and Ivy having anything. Ivy just straight up stopped appearing in Harley's solo series altogether. They did make them appear as a couple in the Heroes in Crisis book, but that was with the intention to kill Ivy off once and for all. And when they walked back on that due to backlash, they came up with a new miniseries for them that portrayed them as friends again.
So Harley and Ivy got brought into this event called Heroes in Crisis, an event so infamous that simply alluding to the fact that I read it on Twitter made everyone lose their minds. To describe everything that happened in Heroes in Crisis is to stare at the eldritch corners of the universe, but all we really need to know is that Poison Ivy dies and then at the end gets reborn into a new body. And there's this one cute exchange between the two, the one good part of Heroes in Crisis. This would lead directly into the exciting news that Harley and Ivy would be getting their own solo miniseries together called Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, all about the two being in a relationship and going on a fun road trip together. And then the book came out, and it was not actually good. The plot revolves around Harley doing some self-examination, deciding that she wants to try being a hero and helping people rather than being a criminal and supervillain. Okay, sure. That tracks. It's the direction that Harley has been heading in for a while. Meanwhile, Poison Ivy is dealing with having a new body and the complications that come with it. The two of them have a simple domestic life together before they have to leave the house because they get attacked by a Floronic Man, which then leads to the series becoming a road trip story as the two try to escape, help Ivy with her new body, and bond with their blooming relationship. Up to this point, the book is fine, if a bit subpar, but then you get to the final issue, which is just weird. Like, we find out that apparently Ivy has a clone of herself that contained her good half or something, and they got switched up in issue 2, and that's the Ivy that Harley has been with for most of the comic, and that the real Ivy has been the one sending plant monsters out to kill them, not Floronic Man. The real Ivy is furious at Harley for not noticing the difference, for trying to do good, for being selfish and putting her own want of a relationship first, mocking her for even thinking that it would be something Ivy would be interested in. It's an incredibly bizarre final turn.
And when they walked back on that due to backlash, they came up with a new miniseries for them that portrayed them as friends again.
And then she argues that the Harley Quinn animated series never planned on making Harley and Ivy a couple, that it was shoved in at the end of season 2 as a way to appease the fans.
Now, the interesting thing happened when they were getting ready to do the Harley Quinn show, and in 2019, it finally released. And to people's surprise, Harley and Ivy were not portrayed as a couple in the show. They were a friendship very much like before. And this was coming out at the same time that they released that mini-series where Harley and Ivy were walked up to a line and didn't cross it in terms of their relationship. And this created an explosion, a giant argument, because it finally seemed to get through to these shippers who weren't reading comics that Harley and Ivy were never the official couple like they thought they were. So there was advocacy and screaming and insistence of that Harley and Ivy needed to be a couple. There was declarations that this was homophobia. Why? Because this seemed to be the one pair of characters, the one pair of characters that anyone seemed to care about at all being together. So finally, what happened is Harley and Ivy would become a couple at the tail end of Harley Quinn season 2.
Even though season 2 was in production and probably finished creatively long before season 1 came out, because that's how animation works. The entire second season built to Harley and Ivy getting together. Hell, the first season teased it. This was entirely planned out from the beginning. That was the end game from episode 1. Also, I tried to find out where JesterBell was talking about with advocacy groups and protesting of the Harley Quinn show. And do you know what I found? Actually, let me rephrase that. Do you know what Lady Emily 3 years ago found?
It should be noted that the final issue came out right before Valentine's Day, which by itself would already set people off, but more drama was beginning to brew in the fandom. Mainly that for Valentine's Day, DC put out a bunch of tweets celebrating canon DC couples, but then also included one with Harley emphasizing her being single, which could be seen as either twisting in the knife post-breakup, or straight up ignoring her relationship. This got even worse when a special Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn collectible statue was revealed. This, combined with the tweet, combined with rumors that DC editorial staff might be trying to minimize Harley and Ivy's relationship with things such as changing the figure's press release or banning writers from using them or modifying the kiss at the end of the Harley and Ivy miniseries to a kiss on the forehead, which... Come on, forehead kisses can be sweet, but this is incredibly, incredibly tame, especially for a passionate goodbye kiss. Led to Harley Ivy fans using the hashtag Harley Kissing Ivy in order to showcase moments from the comic that had them as a couple, as well as display their own fan art and send messages to DC that this is a popular, well-supported ship that shouldn't be erased or disregarded.
It had nothing to do with the animated series. It had everything to do with the comics and several controversial tweets and posts posted around the time that they broke up Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy in the miniseries that she keeps citing as them just being friends and not relationship, even though you can't break up with someone if you're not already in a relationship. JesterBell, did you even read the comics that you're talking about? Like, the show focuses on human beings interacting with each other. Yeah, there's some sex jokes on occasion. Yeah, there's some intimate moments on occasion. But the show really does a great job focusing on character and growth. It does balance the adult humor of adult cartoons of the era with some adult storytelling. Genuinely adult storytelling. And it's really good. It's a great example of the best that Harley and Ivy can offer when written at their peaks. Both the toxic elements of their relationship and the positive. And that dynamic makes it, in my opinion, peak Harley Quinn writing, peak Poison Ivy writing. This is the best they've been written, and I'm counting the comics, and I'm counting the DC animated universe as a result of this too. All that ties in here. This is the best we're getting, and it might be the best we ever get with these characters. When people talk about the relationship between Harley and Ivy, this is the peak and the pinnacle they compare it to. And I think in a lot of cases, it's what people wish the comics also did. Because quite frankly, as I've said 100 times before and 100 times to come, it depends on the writer. That seems fitting for this occasion. I'll fix that right now. But what strikes me as very strange with all this is that JesterBell then blames fans for these characters being written a certain way. That different writers wrote these characters differently because the fans pushed it or whatever.
But it gets worse from there, because it's one thing to have Harley and Ivy be a wholly boring relationship where everything somehow is just so sickeningly perfect, like eating too much sugar, where even these terrible things that they do to each other is considered good because they just accept it somehow, and never mind how or why, they just do. But this is the most fetishized, sexualized relationship I have ever seen in comics. It's like people think that because the idea from fans in their headcanon that Harley and Ivy have the most wonderful, magical, perfect relationship possible, the way to show them really caring about each other, since they can't in any other way because everything is just magically perfect, is to just sexualize it as much as possible. Turn them into complete horn dogs for each other, where it's constantly giggling about running into the bedroom and talking about what they're going to do to each other and talking about each other's bodies and all of that stuff, and makeout sessions, and just it is constant sex talk from these two characters in all of these comics. And that's not even getting to the even just straight up fetishization.
It ignores tons of arcs and narratives. And just food for thought, if you're saying that Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy do nothing but have sex in their various comics, it usually helps to use examples from more than 2 comics in your example to prove that this always happens. Because that's all there is, and one of them is a spin-off of the Harley Quinn animated show, so I'm just saying it's not the widest collection of examples here. JesterBell then flip-flops a little bit between saying the writers are crazy for writing Harley Quinn and Ivy a certain way, or the fans are being overly demanding and cruel for asking for a relationship. God forbid fans ask for something.
There was this comic called Harley and Ivy, the Eat, Bang, Kill Tour, and it is exactly what it implies. Now, this lady they hired, T. Franklin, she is just this drugged out lady online. She is just crazy if you've seen anything that she posted. But they take out this really drugged out lady who is a former prostitute, and she writes this comic, and the entire comic is just a softcore porn book. T. Franklin put in all of her fetishes and all the things that she knows in this comic, and even self-inserted herself into the comic at one point. I could not believe that DC Comics would release this book for who used to be 2 of their icons from the Batman universe, and they even let her do another one.
This is where JesterBell goes from just simply being unknowledgeable about comics to actively malicious with her representation of T. Franklin here. T. Franklin has been in the comic industry for well over 15 years, both as a journalist and as an independently published author. She's a GLAAD Media Award nominee. She's a Prism comic winner. She's worked in comics for years and has incorporated her mental health struggles and physical health struggles into her work. Also, she's from Jersey. That right there gives her 10 points in my book. She deals with ADHD, autism, a permanent injury from a car accident. She's an abuse survivor. She's been speaking about accommodating needs and physical needs in conventions for years. She is a major advocate for representation in media and has written comics for Harley Quinn because they've sold well. In fact, the Eat, Bang, Kill Tour comic is specifically inspired by Thelma and Louise. If you've seen the movie Thelma and Louise, the comic follows almost the same general structure as that movie, a movie that came out in the 90s. So if you're going to be outraged by this comic, I wonder what your thoughts are on Thelma and Louise. The drugs that JesterBell is alluding to here is pain medication for her permanent disability. The mental hospital that she's acknowledging was for depression following domestic abuse. The elements that JesterBell leaves out to make this woman sound crazy is incredibly obnoxious. She has a career because she's earned the respect of her peers through hard work and advocacy for marginalized people. What are you talking about, JesterBell? Keep in mind, she's kind of ignoring the fact that Harley and Ivy keep breaking up with each other. That half these storylines involve Harley and Ivy breaking up, coming together, doing some alone solace time, going on a road trip and contemplating destroying the world, coming back, forming a relationship, dying, being resurrected. There's a lot of places in these storylines where the characters are written separately, but JesterBell acts as though, oh no, that's every title together, it's all the same, and ignores stuff like, say, the Poison Ivy solo title, where the characters break up and Poison Ivy goes off to kind of rediscover herself. These are all major elements of the character that they gloss over a bit in this video. They kind of ignore those components. But one thing I agree with JesterBell on is this. DC has done Harley Quinn dirty. And a lot of the art of Harley Quinn is fetishistic. But not because of Poison Ivy. Harley Quinn is a woman who was brought into insanity by the Joker, who exploited her sympathy for him to make her crazy. Her outfits, her behavior, it's a byproduct of the Joker's abuse. He abused Harley, beat her, tortured her, threatened her, drove her to deep, deep-seated depression and self-hatred. And the comics would often hypersexualize Harley in the moments where Joker was abusive. Her under Joker's control is hypersexualized on the terms the Joker sets for her. Even when some writers try to bring her back as an independent character, other artists and other writers would drag her back into the Joker's world, ignoring her growth from other issues in order to just make her the Joker's henchman, to force her in this slot that was initially set for her back when she first appeared. DC was trying to hire some artists. They issued a prompt. Draw Harley Quinn in a bathtub. And look, I can't say specifically what was happening because YouTube hates this if I don't break it up a little bit as I'm talking about it, but it involves several electrical appliances dangling overhead, over the tub. You get what I'm implying here. Is a piece of artwork that was posted by DC around Valentine's Day of Harley Quinn alone and miserable. And that was, again, making a joke at Harley's expense. Harley was the butt end of that joke. Harley's misery is a marketing tool. Harley's pain is a marketing tool. The dynamics that other characters like Joker, always the Joker, set for Harley, those costume standards, those outfits, those behavior, that is fetishized. That is what it is. Not Harley and Ivy being together. No. It's her abuse, her pain. That is the fetishistic material DC publishes and promotes and uses as promotion consistently, always, again and again and again. You cannot talk about Harley Quinn being fetishized without also talking about the way they present her being abused. JesterBell argues that Harley Quinn is always in a relationship, always romantically involved, always intimate with Poison Ivy. And all the examples she cites are comics about their relationship. Yeah, they would be in a relationship in the comic about their relationship. Who would have imagined that? Kind of wild, isn't it? That Harley and Ivy in a comic book about Harley and Ivy's relationship would be in a relationship. It's kind of wild that stories where Harley is allowed ownership of her body are written differently than a storyline where the Joker tells Harley to peel her face off. Amazing how the tone is so different in books that have a different perspective on how the character should be written. What's funny about all this is I don't think JesterBell had any care when, say, Superman and Wonder Woman were together and had multiple books devoted to their escapades. She doesn't have a single video on her channel about it, as far as I can tell. She complains about Ms. Marvel and Captain Marvel existing. Yeah, sure. Refusing to make women attractive anymore. Hang on a second. Hang on. Wait, you're complaining about that, but then saying that it's bad that Harley Quinn has ownership over her body and enjoys herself. And well, I feel there's something I'm missing here. There's some oddity here I'm just not piecing together about this JesterBell character. It seems a little contradictory, doesn't it? I don't know. Something going on here. She complains about Mary Jane and Peter Parker. Wait, no, she doesn't complain about the relationship. She complains about the adaptations of MJ being bad. Around the time Spider-Man 2 came out, and people were getting angry about Mary Jane not looking attractive enough in the Spider-Man 2 game. Odd how that tends to be the trend. She doesn't complain about, say, Hercules and She-Hulk having a relationship, or Batman's various escapades. But Harley and Ivy being intimate, that's too much for her. Even though comics have had tons of this. Hell, Mary Jane and Peter Parker have had more moments together in an intimate fashion than Harley and Ivy have ever. By a mile, But she doesn't complain about that. Just when it's Harley and Ivy, I feel there's a difference between how MJ and Peter are and how Harley and Ivy are. There's something I'm missing. I'm not picking up on it quite yet. There's some element I'm not seeing here. I couldn't imagine what the difference between Peter Parker and MJ are and Harley and Ivy. Oh, that's right, because Harley and Ivy are still together and MJ and Peter Parker aren't. I'm upset by that too. I think they should both be together, but I digress. Hey, Paul! Again, JesterBell ignores all the times DC and editorial at DC and all the writers broke up Harley and Ivy. She acts like it's a continual thread from the first time they kissed to now of them being together, but that's really not the case. There's more time during that period of time where they're broken up. DC refuses to even acknowledge some stretches of time with their relationship. There's a lot of it missing, you know? And they always find a way to say, oh, we're doing it for the first time. This is the new canon. We're really bringing them together now. It's a marketing ploy. It's always a marketing ploy. It's always down to marketing. You ever notice that with all this? It's kind of wild.
But I've had it sprayed in my face through this years that no, this is the best relationship ever, the most wonderful thing. As they're coming out with like the fart fetish comic and whatever they want to come out with, just sexualizing these characters to hell and back, getting rid of who they were and just turning these into these empty shells that are romanticizing, ironically, toxic relationships. But you can't say anything about it, anything negative about it. They are deadlocked here for however long because DC Comics does not care about either of these characters and they've just given them away to these people who want this sort of thing.
What does JesterBell say we should do? Well, her argument is that Harley and Ivy should never be together and never interact ever again.
And you might be asking me right now, JesterBell, I bet you just want these two characters to just go back to being friends again. You toxic person. You just want this romantic couple of this great representation to go back to being friends. Actually, no. I never want to see these two characters together again. Even as friends. I never want to see these two characters together again. They have completely ruined their friendship that they once have. And this is what hurts me so much about it is they started out on a kid's show. And yes, it went into darker territories, but it was a kid's show nonetheless. There was still an innocence to it. And they have just turned them into the most disgusting things you can imagine. It's really just shocking. It's like seeing Bugs Bunny eternally turned into fetish content with this stuff.
Not just not be friends, not just not interact, they just go the separate ways and go back to the way the characters were years ago. That Poison Ivy should just be an eco-terrorist who wants to destroy all humanity, and that Harley should just be the glorified henchwoman of the Joker. Because that makes sense, right? That's a wise decision to make, to pair them together again. But there is one thing I do want to point out that JesterBell says that's interesting. I do think that it has hurt Poison Ivy's character being with Harley at times.
But what I want to talk about importantly during this era is that Poison Ivy completely changed here. She was no longer Harley's disapproving, tough love best friend. She was no longer this eco-terrorist. She was now this soft-hearted, soft-spoken girl whose entire character seeming to be approving of Harley and giggling at her antics. She wasn't even a terrorist anymore. She just happened to be an environmentalist on the side. Just as Harley's character completely changed when they made her Deadpool, all of a sudden Ivy's character would change coming into the book.
Though some writers have tried to fix this. I don't think that Poison Ivy is a replacement for the Joker or anything like that, but I think that Poison Ivy is a hard character to write in the modern era. When she was written back in the 60s, she represented society's fear of second-wave feminism. This is back in a time where women could not get a credit card without their husband's permission. She was an eco-terrorist, pushing against the big industries with their coal and their fossil fuels. And she was against the sexist society, trying to push for women to have an agenda, taking ownership of her appearance and body in an era where women couldn't open a credit card. Now, mind you, she's still an eco-terrorist, she still wants to destroy the world, but there's components of her personality that are less demonic nowadays, in an era where women do have more rights, and in an era where we do acknowledge climate change is a big deal. Because this character was so rooted in ideology from the 60s, when the character moves on past the 60s, it gets harder and harder to really hate this character. Same way with Venom. Venom, again, his morality shifted over time. Poison Ivy, her morality shifted over time as new ideas were brought into the fold, as new thoughts were put into the character. Her ideas became less unreasonable. Not to the same extent as Magneto, because big difference between Magneto and Poison Ivy. I will acknowledge that. But Poison Ivy is more sympathetic today than she was in the 60s, because a lot of people have fears for the environment. They want to save the world from environmental climate change. So, hey, maybe she's onto something there. It's the destroying all humanity thing where people start to draw the line at, for reasons that are obvious. So writers have an option. You can either make Poison Ivy worse, more extreme, more violent, more frightening, to make her more of a threat in the modern era, or you can play up the sympathy audiences began to develop for her character. And they've gone in different directions on this front. Again, going back to Gotham City Sirens, Catwoman sees there's good in Poison Ivy. In the DC animated shows, Poison Ivy still cares deeply for Harley, even though Harley gets on her nerves quite a lot. There is that humanity there that's overshadowed by the villainous destructive tendencies, sure. She still donates millions of dollars that she harvests from her crimes to charities protecting the rainforests. There's a lot of good in her. Back during the New 52, they even tied her in with the green, the cosmic essence of nature, tying her up with Swamp Thing. So again, Poison Ivy does develop relationships outside of Harley Quinn that are explored in the comics, that JesterBell conveniently forgets about, or ignores, or maybe doesn't know in the first place. And again, even when they're broken up, there's times in the storyline where they do explore her character, do explore her frustrations with Harley, and try to put her in situations where she's independent and can continue to be her own person. And yes, and then she wants to destroy the world in the process too, because she is still a bad guy. Of course. And that's interesting, and that's fun, but the problem is the writers don't seem to agree on whether or not Poison Ivy is a villain or a anti-hero. Even in Heroes in Crisis, the same thing occurs. And as a result of that, they're written differently depending on the writer. To say with any certainty that Poison Ivy is written one way exclusively today is misleading, because it ignores all the other advancements people have made with her character independent of Harley Quinn. JesterBell says these comics are just constant sex talk, nothing but sex. But does that happen a lot? I mean, yeah, sure. But this video ignores, say, Harley Quinn Broken Glass, or the Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn solo series where Poison Ivy is forced to reckon with her own divided feelings on Harley and the world at large, with her being split into two personalities, a good half and an evil half. But let's also ignore how Harley, during the Joker War event, had a major moment, helping snap Batman out of his own problems. Let's ignore how she dismisses the moments of emotional intimacy to focus on the eroticism. JesterBell is only interested in framing these moments not as character beats or vulnerable beats, but rather sexual beats, which casts a very weird shadow over everything she's saying, as though even the two characters talking is somehow erotic. And notice how she doesn't complain about any of the erotic art of Harley Quinn pre-New 52, all of which did exploit her appearance to be titillating. It also ignores a lot of the artwork from the New 52 that depicts Harley in extremely skimpy outfits. JesterBell seems okay with that, but she doesn't seem okay with Harley and Ivy just being vulnerable with each other or being enamored with each other. It's very strange how these particular points are what push the line too far for her, and not any of these previous points, which in my opinion were far more exploitative and far more fetishistic than anything she's citing here, aside from the fart comic, which again, I am not defending. And I think that's a big issue I have with this discussion. It's so unnuanced. And I get it. She's probably reading off the cuff of some notes she wrote down and has some vague ideas. But you know what the thing is? So am I. Half this wasn't even written. I improvised half this script. Half this video was improvised. Could you tell? I'm sure you could tell in some points. And even I still thought of like, okay, what's the history? What are the examples? What can I find? And you know what I did if I didn't know the answer to the things I was talking about? I looked it up. A lot of this is based on Comic-Con data I just looked at while writing the script. A lot of it's based on going to the wikis and saying, oh, where did Harley Quinn appear? That whole thing with the 17 issues between 1999 and her solo issue in 2000, December 2000, that was just from looking at the freaking wiki for the character. I did like 5 minutes of research. This wasn't an in-depth video I did. Hell, most of this I wrote on my phone when I was in the bathroom. You know, this isn't like a complicated thing here. And don't get me wrong, errors are easy to make in videos like this with tons of research. In fact, I deliberately left in one error I made while making this video, just to see if you noticed it. Did you pick up on it? Go back to the beginning of the video. The Green Goblin did not die in Amazing Spider-Man 123. He died issue 122. I even included the right issue there. If you look closely, it says 122 on the cover. Did you notice it? Did you comment it? If so, congratulations. You are exercising the proper amount of criticism you should exercise when anyone online tells you anything. But also, if you commented, oh, the Green Goblin didn't die in that issue, and you didn't finish the rest of the video, well, now everyone just annoy him in the comments. I'm kidding. You're good and valid. But the point I'm trying to say is this. Anyone can make an error, and it's fine, but you need to be careful that you don't just let it out in the open without assessing that you made that error. You have to fact check yourself. You have to be careful. And if you make an error, then learn from it. Don't deliberately double down on these errors. The point is that a modicum, a minuscule amount of research goes a long way when discussing these characters. If you're talking about sweeping trends for how characters are written over a long period of time, you have to actually put in the work. You have to do research. You have to read up on these characters. Hell, I'm not even convinced she's even read some of the comics she was talking about, because she's talking about the DC Harley Quinn comic, the spin-off comic for the TV animated series, as though it's a DC canon material. Like, it feels like there's an element missing here. There's some, hell, this whole thing I'm just improvising, by the way. This is my thoughts after watching this video a dozen times and writing the script and all that. It just feels so frustrating to watch because people put in the work on this platform. People do so much research on getting comic details right, looking up to make sure the continuity is correct. If you make a mistake in a video about comics, someone in the comments will point out to you and say, oh, hey, you made a mistake with this detail. Like, oh, okay, cool. Thanks for letting me know. But the thing is, it's so baffling about this video that I find so frustrating is it's so clear at times she didn't do the research. She looked up a few facts and she based the entire assumption of hundreds of comic books written over the course of 2 decades, 2.5 decades really, and based off a few little modicum of details that she found here and there. She didn't dig any deeper because she wants to present an agenda, and that agenda is that she doesn't think that Harley Quinn is written well today because she took a few comics that wrote her intentionally silly and assumes that's how she's written everywhere. She didn't read Joker War, for one. I can't say she did because Joker War Harley is so serious and so grim in comparison to her more light stuff. The character is written differently depending on who writes the character. Same with Poison Ivy. She's either more of a villain or more of a tragic sort of character. And again, it's meant to create an idea in the audience's perspective, in their minds, that modern comics are going away from the past, the good old days that you grew up with. It's the idea that comics are somehow shifting in a direction that's bad and toxic, or woke. That word always comes up, a useless, meaningless buzzword that means absolutely nothing in the vast scheme of storytelling. It doesn't mean anything in terms of this discussion. The fact is, it's just the most popular relationship in comics between 2 women. And that's why it draws a lightning rod. It doesn't matter how popular it is, it doesn't matter how many people like it. She argues that the Harley Quinn show should be canceled and won't come back. It was a failure in some ways.
These days, Harley and Ivy, though, they don't get much talk beyond internet talk still. It's like once people achieve what they finally wanted with them, they left. So maybe you would think that we could finally get these characters back. Like, it doesn't seem like they're going to get more of that show at this point.
One of the most popular adaptations of the Harley Quinn character is a failure. That went on for 5 seasons in an era where most shows get canceled after 1 season or 2 seasons. Okay, yeah, sure. It's a failure, whatever. Yeah, sure it is. Problem is this. The video's audience won't care about this response. They'll just keep going with what they want. But we discuss things for a reason. We discuss and react not so much to draw attention or negativity towards another creator on here. It's more to point out the obvious nonsense of this video. This video was not made to communicate a real point. It was made to grift. It was made to capitalize on anger made towards modern DC. She presents a point, she cites a couple examples, and says these couple examples are representative of thousands upon thousands of issues that I didn't read, but I can assume they're basically all the same as this. And that's unnuanced. It's one of the reasons why I started this channel, to talk about things in a more nuanced perspective. And yeah, I'm not always right. I'm wrong sometimes, quite frequently actually. But when I'm wrong, I own up to it. That's important. Maybe she'll own up to it. I have no idea. But point is, I disagree very firmly with this video, and I think it's not the best of videos. But hey, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I think that if you haven't read a Harley Quinn comic in a while, you really should pick up a few. And I think there's some good stories out there. And there's a lot of bad stories too. But that's comics. We forget the worst of comics past because the good stuff stands out. I mentioned before a bunch of Venom minis that came out. Half of those are complete trash. They're garbage storylines. They're not that good. But the best stuff stands out. The best stuff sticks in memory. And that's the same with comics too. A lot of this I went back to and found, oh, I forgot about this issue. I forgot about that comic, with Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. The best stands out. The mediocre and the worst are forgotten. That's always how it is. That's how memory works. You remember the best and you forget all but the very worst.
You're just one big forgiving doormat, aren't you?
I am not a doormat. Am I?
If you had a middle name, it would be Welcome.